G'day, welcome to True Blue History. I'm Adam Blum. Today's special guest is former Special Forces Commando Warrant Officer Nick Hill. Nick has joined us today to talk about his career in the Special Forces and the Commando's role in the Defence Force. He will also be talking about his life after service. Hi Nick, thanks for joining us on the show.
No worries, Adam. Thanks for having me, mate.
No, Nick, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on and talk about your career. So, Nick, your family has a strong military history. Your great-great-uncle was Lieutenant Colonel Henry Murray, VC Harry Murray, CMG, DSO, plus bar, DCM. Could you tell us about his service?
Yep. So Mad Harry was the nickname he was given. He was a woodcutter from, he was originally born in Tasmania, and he was a woodcutter in Western Australia when the war broke out. He enlisted with the 16th Battalion, with the 1st AOF in 1915. And then he landed at Gallipoli on Anzac Day when the 16th Battalion come ashore, I think just after lunch or mid-afternoon. And he was a part of a machine gun crew with Percy Black, who became quite a famous Australian soldier. So on the by the end of the night of Anzac Day, at a place called Pope's Hill at Gallipoli, he got wounded at Gallipoli. He won a DCM for his actions on the first day at Gallipoli. And then he was wounded. He was then promoted to lieutenant, and then was posted to Gallipoli, and then was sent to the Western Front. And his first action as a company commander, now as a captain, was at the Battle of Pozieres, and in particular at Milke Farm, where the 16th Battalion fought there. He won his Victoria Cross at a little place called Gordecourt in northwest France, where he was the company commander of A Company. And he won a DSO and bar, or he won his bar to his DSO at the Battle of Bullecourt in 1917. And when he was given the bar to his DSO, Birdwood, who I think from memory was the commander of Australian troops at the time, said to Harry that if he had held the line that day, he'd be given the bar to his VC instead. So he fought all the way through the war. He became a lieutenant colonel, commander of the 4th Machine Gun Battalion from memory. He was attached to the Americans during their phases of the war in 1918. Came home in 1919, became a farmer in the in Queensland. When the Second World War broke out, he went to join up again, and they said, "No way, you're the most famous Australian still VC winner still living." So they made him a battalion commander of a militia battalion and sent him to North Queensland. And I can't remember the name of the battalion or the number of the battalion, but he was eventually forcibly retired, and unfortunately he died of complications after a car accident in 1966. So I never got to meet him. I'm not quite that ancient yet, but he was, it wasn't very well known in our family. It was because it's on my mother's side. So, most things in our family were done through the men, so to speak. But, later in life, my brother did a history of the family, and, his name came up and sort of stuck around ever since then. And, it's quite a privilege to have him as part of the family or be related to him. And it's, he's the most highest decorated Allied officer of the First World War. So, and not many Australians actually know that, but those who know the history of the First World War certainly do know that.
One very brave man, Nick, that I've certainly done a lot of research on him, and I call him a soldier's soldier. Just absolutely, some of the work that he did was just absolutely, some of the accounts you read, Nick, are just, you shake your head and go, far out, that's just crazy. Like, well, you shouldn't be alive. And he's a very, very special character, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, mate. It's like I've been to Gordecourt and I've been to all the other places he fought at, and to stand on the ground and look around, and obviously trying to get a perspective of what they went through and so forth. And being a veteran myself, I've got some sort of idea, but sort of laying on the ground, trying to look at the head height that they would have been at, across the valleys, and especially at Bulla Court when they walked across open, no man's land. And what was interesting about the story about him at the Battle of Bulla Court was, he was I'm pretty sure, I think from memory, he was the company commander of A Company, which was on the left hand, the forward right of his battalion, and Percy Black was the company commander of A Company of the 13th Battalion, sorry, on the 16th Battalion, and they were linked together, and those two walked across the battlefield together, and side by side, and unfortunately Percy Black got killed that day. They obviously went forward, took the trenches, couldn't hold it any longer, came back, and Harry went looking for him, and he just couldn't find him. So, and Percy Black was never found. But that's just the luck of it. You know what I mean? It's like they're standing side by side, and next minute your best mate's gone, and you've got a job to keep on. So
when you talk about Bull Core, Nick, I've walked that ground as well, and it just strikes you at how flat it is, and like where they come from the rail cutting, and you stand in the Bull Core, the Bull Core statue, and you look out, and it's just flat ground. It's just open country, and you think, how did anyone survive? Like it was, just unbelievable fighting, and that's how I got my interest in World War One history was, reading the battles of Pozieres, reading Bull Core and Polygon Wood, and just how any of those men came home. It's just truly amazing, and as you say, it's special to have a relative as Harry Murray, like absolutely amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and, like I said, it was found by accident, and thanks to my brother for doing the research on it. And I never met my grandfather or the older parts of my family. I met my grandmother obviously, but just the stories that are I was very young when my great uncles and that passed away, and I do remember talking to my great uncles about some of the battles they were fought in during World War II. But they're different stories. But you just just hear the stories that your grandmother and aunts and uncles tell you about, because they're passed down from generation to generation. It's absolutely amazing. And then, like you said, when you actually go there and look at the ground, having a tactical mind, I'm just looking at it. What the hell would you cross here? It's just madness. So
I look at it, Nick, and I see, like you as a soldier can see the tactics of it. Me as a civilian, I see it and go, wow, like this is just, I wouldn't want to be here. You as a soldier is a totally different perspective again, going, holy crap, like how did any of them come out alive? Like really, how did any of them come out?
Yeah. It's the same with Gallipoli, mate. I went there in January 2015. I didn't go to the 100th anniversary, but I was lucky enough to go. I was there for Australia Day in 2015. And, I went with General Senator Jim Molan, and we took a couple of, about 12, I think 13 kids from Western Sydney and the Cronulla Shire area. And, I was standing there. That was the first time I'd been to Gallipoli. I'm just standing on the beach, just going, what the hell would you do, assaulting up these cliffs? It's just crazy. I'm just, and then you just look at the terrain's obviously very different to what it was back then, but because it's a national park now, but I just shake my head at it. I'm just like, wow. Tactically, I'm like, this is crazy,
It's, mate, I was lucky enough to go to the centenary of Anzac Day at Gallipoli in 2015, and exactly the same thoughts. I got there and I looked up and I just went, how did anyone come out of this as well? Like, of all the places to fight wars, it's just and how small the place is. Like, Gallipoli is so small. And there was 50,000 troops packed in like sardines, and you can stand in the middle where the 4th Machine Gun Battalion Cemetery is. You walk up to the hill, you walk in the middle, and you look, there's one end at Queen's Post, and then you look at the other end and there's beach, like there's the beach, and you think, that's like, and how many people died. It's just, you can't fathom it. Like, it's Gallipoli and the Western Front are two special places. Like, and I always say it on my podcast, Nick, and I say it to anyone, when you get a chance, when we can travel again, go and see those battlefields. You will not be sorry that you've done it and you've walked that ground, because like, mate, and what strikes me is always like Lone Pine, the story of Lone Pine and the neck. And the neck, my stomach was twisted in knots, because you see it's the size of a cricket pitch and they got no further than 5 yards, and it's just, you can't fathom it. Like, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I remember standing in that forward trench at the neck with Jim Molan, and we were talking about trying to explain to these kids about, sacrifice and, why people went over the top and all this sort of stuff, and why you do certain things. And, it all comes down to a lot of people. It's about your brotherhood and your mateship that you've got, that Australians are well known for and famous for around the world, that you, regardless of how thick, the fighting is and how bad it gets, you're always there standing side by side with your brother and, fighting for his life and he's fighting for yours. And, you can just imagine, putting your head over the top of the parapet there at the neck, and just, as you've seen the cemetery there, which is where they fell. It's just, like, it's like a tennis court, and it's just like, just shaking your head at it. It's like, oh my God, you're talking about a whole battalion get wiped out within 15 minutes or whatever it was. And it's just, the Turks are on the parapet just going, stop, we're just ordering you, and it's just crazy to see that sort of stuff. But you understand, I think, mateship and brotherhood and, honour and all that sort of stuff. That's why people did what they did. And, those guys who made it all the way through, you can, certainly appreciate what they've been through. Those little guys, not many of them left, with the A on their shoulder flash, saying they'd been at Gallipoli as well, So, yeah, regardless of which war you fought in and where you fought, people can relate to, veterans in particular, and, guys back home, firefighters and policemen and so forth. We all have an ambulance people. We all have an understanding of, what toughness is and, what mateship is, because the things you got to do to help each other and protect. So, yeah, and I think these kids had a good understanding of it, once we, sort of explained it, and Jim sort of explained it from a commander's point of view, and I explained it from a soldier's point of view, and I think they came away with a good understanding of what it means.
Absolutely, and I think that's why, mate, I get yourself and other veterans and historians on to educate the kids, and because without knowing your history, you've got no history, you've got no future, because we learn from our history, and I think it's so important to have these conversations with the future generations to understand what their forefathers and yourself and other veterans have been through, and for those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice. So yeah, I think it's very important.
Yeah, definitely, mate, for sure.
So your maternal grandfather was a nuclear physicist who served in World War II on the Manhattan Project and the atomic testing in Woomera and Malaysia after the war. For those listeners who aren't familiar with these projects, what were they, and what role did your grandfather have?
So, it's interesting you asked this question, mate, because a lot of the stuff that was, about my grandfather's service during World War II has been redacted and, still very top secret. A lot of the information we're still not allowed to, I've got my grandfather's documents, and a lot of it's not misplaced, but it's, deliberately not written in, obviously for secrecy reasons. But basically what the Manhattan Project, for those that don't know, was the creation of the atomic bomb by the US, the UK. Australia had a very small part in it. And so they were the guys who created the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki towards the end of World War II in Japan. And after the war, my grandfather and his family, so my grandmother, my mother, and my uncle went to the UK for about 4 years after the war. And my grandfather was sent to Germany to discuss things with the German scientists after the war about their nuclear program. Now, nowhere in the world is there written anything like that, right? So in these documents, it doesn't talk, Major Nicholson went to, Germany to talk to nuclear scientists. That's not what's written, but it's what he says when he came back, obviously, and it's been passed down. So nothing is ever written, but it does prove that he went to Berlin after the war. It says that he was posted to a particular British Army unit in the Rhine and in Germany itself. And he was there for a period and he went back and forth quite a few times. And from everything that my family has told me is that that's what he was doing. So he was talking to them about their programs. And obviously a lot of the Germans were sent to the US and so forth, and Russia and blah, 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 and created their nuclear programs. But so he came back from the UK in 1950, I think it was, from memory. And not long after that, the Brits started their atomic testing program at Maralinga in South Australia. And he was there for a lot of the testing and so forth. And he was part of the rocket program as well, which was the rockets were being fired out of Woomera, which was quite an appropriate name because of what a Woomera actually is. And, the rockets been fired and tested out of there. And so he was part of that program right up until his retirement. Now, the interesting part that I found out of this was that my mother tells me the story of, he would wake up in the middle of the night and get dressed in his uniform, and a black Dodge would turn up with two military policemen. They take him away in the middle of the night, and then months and months later, he would return. The same thing, in a black Dodge in the middle of the night, come back home. And he was never allowed to talk about the projects or anything they were involved in. But, once certain things happen in their lives, people start to talk about certain things. And then he retired. He had a lot of mental issues from the war and parts of things that he was involved in. And he became quite ill. Obviously, a lot of things, you'd call it post-traumatic stress nowadays. But he felt really guilty about a lot of things that he was involved in, like the whole, what they created, I suppose. A lot of the guys during the Manhattan Project and so forth realised what they'd created. And so he was, he died in 1966 of a heart attack. And yeah, sort of like my grandmother fought for a long time for him to be recognised as part of the atomic testing programs that Australia had finally, realised that a lot of people got sick out of it, and a lot of guys died of cancer from it because of the atomic testing and so forth. So she fought mainly for the rest of his life, or her life, trying to get him recognised. So I think about 1983 or 4, I think is when the government passed, or somewhere around then, the nuclear, part of DVA sort of stuff. So yeah, it was interesting because he was never allowed to go and fight overseas. So I think that sort of, like, his brother fought overseas. His brother was a prisoner of war, and his cousins and all that, they all fought overseas, but he was never allowed to because of what he did for the government, so, and the army. So I think he had a bit of a survivor's guilt, so to speak, in some aspects. And I think that it's sort of those who don't talk about things, it comes to a head eventually. So yeah, so that's who he was.
Yeah, it's one of those stories, isn't it, mate, where you always, if, like, I've learnt too myself, that if you don't talk, it bottles up and festers, and you've got to let it out somehow. You've got to try and get your experiences out, and to cope.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, mate. Totally agree.
So, did the service of your relatives inspire you to join the army, or was it something else that appealed to you to join the army?
I think from my earliest memories, that's all I ever wanted to do was be a soldier. I knew about my grandfather, and I knew about my uncles and so forth. And obviously Henry Murray hadn't come on the scene family-wise at that stage. And they all served. But my grandfather's brother, my great uncle, he served in World War II. He served at Korea, and he went to Vietnam in the early stages of the Vietnam War. So he was Ordnance Corps and so forth. So he wasn't fighting like the rest of them all the time. But, I remember listening to his stories and, my other uncles talking about their service and so forth. And, some family members, their great friends were Korea veterans and Vietnam veterans. And I suppose, from my own perspective, it was always something that inspired me to join, and then learning about the history. I'm a massive history buff. I love it, especially Australian history and so forth. And I think that just inspired me to join. But the funny thing was because my mother was never really wanted me to join. And I think this had a lot to do with her father's experience. And, it sort of got to a point where, I was, all I ever wanted to do was be a soldier. And so when it came to do work experience at school, I played around with being a carpenter and all this sort of stuff, but I was always going to be a soldier. So I sort of just, appeased my mother, and I know she's going to listen to this, and I've told this story to her before, but I appeased her at doing something different, but I always knew I was going to be a soldier. That's all I ever wanted to do. So, I was in school cadets, which I really enjoyed, and I joined the reserves when I was 17 because my brother was in the reserves. He's 10 years older than I am, and he was getting out of the reserves when I was getting in and joining up. And my brother always said to me, he goes, don't do it. You won't enjoy it. And I thought, he did say to me, he goes, join the reserve so you get a bit of a taste of it first, So I did. And, I pretty much did continuous full-time service with the reserves, and I was parading every day of the week. And, I just loved it. I just loved the idea of being a soldier, I absolutely loved it. And then I think I just decided to, if I don't do it, I'm going to regret it. One of my best friends at school, he's born 3 days after me, a bloke called Nathan Fleury, who I respected very much. He joined the regular army just after our birthdays when we turned 17. And, he left not long after his 4-year service was up, and I sort of remember talking to him about things and, good and bad about full-time service, etc. I mean, like everything in life, but yeah, I just knew that if I don't give this a go, I'm going to regret it. So I did, I joined up and never looked back.
So you joined the full-time army, and so in 1993, you deployed for the first time overseas. What are your memories of your first deployment to Malaysia?
Yeah. When I joined the battalion, I went to 5-7 after Kapuka and recruit in IETs. So the company that I went to, Delta Company, when I turned up to the battalion in September 1990, the company had just returned from Malaysia. So in the interwar periods, for a better term, between Vietnam and when we started going to Timor and other places, if you hadn't been to Malaysia, you hadn't been, you know what I mean? You hadn't been and served, so it was a big thing. Everybody's like, how many tours have you done at Butterworth and blah, 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 blah. So when the guys came back, and unfortunately they lost a guy on their tour in Malaysia, he was killed doing an airfield run in Malaysia, which, it's quite hot in Malaysia as we can ascertain, in the tropics and so forth. So, unfortunately he died over there. So there was a lot of, sadness when the company came home. But that's all the boys ever talked about. They all talked about going to Malaysia and, going to Palada and a jungle warfare school and, going to Singapore and all these places. So that's all you ever heard. So when we went over in October 1993, and we were replacing Bravo Company, who unfortunately had a bad accident when they were there, and 5 of our guys in the battalion were killed in a truck crash in September 1993. And so the first thing I remember is the aircraft doors of the RAF 707 opening, and just the heat and the stench of the place is the first thing I remember. It was just so hot. And because we were coming into the wet season, the humidity is 100%, it's just like cutting a cake with a knife, mate. It was horrendous, and just the smell of the monsoonal drains filling up with stagnant water. And it was just, I can imagine how, guys who fought through the Pacific campaigns and Vietnam, just the smell of the jungle and so forth. So that's the first thing I remember about Malaysia was the smell of the aircraft door opening and just flooding down the aisle of the aircraft. It's just like, oh God, we're here for 4 months, and it's getting through there at the airport there at Penang, which is the little island on the northwest coast of Malaysia, and then jumping on the bus and heading out to the Malaysian Air Force Base at Butterworth, which used to be a RAF Air Force Base. The RAF still got aircraft there, but certainly did back then. And I remember seeing the signs about the big billboards about drug trafficking, and Barlow and Chambers were killed not long before, or executed there not long before. I think it was about 4 or 5 years before I was there, and whatever it was, and that sort of reminded me of that was obviously big news back then in the 80s about Barlow and Chambers drug trafficking and so forth. So that that's sort of things I remember in the Malay Air Force Police. The handau, we called them. The handau would be, standing at attention, saluting and so forth as we came through the gates. And, so to me, Malaysia was, the next war. Not that it was, but, it was an absolutely amazing time, amazing experience to have. And, I'm glad that we're still going there and guys are learning jungle warfare and which, Australians are quite renowned for. And, it's probably one of the best experiences. I mean, I'd never been out of Australia, until I was in Malaysia. So, learning a bit of Bahasa and so forth, and the cultures, and traveling and getting to see different parts of the world it was amazing.
Because how old were you at that stage, Nick?
I was 21.
21, yeah.
Yeah. 21. I've been in there since '89, so
Yeah, it's see different parts of the world. I mean, for most people who go on their first overseas deployment, and most of the veterans I've spoken to, that's their first deployment. That's the first time they've left Australia. And for me, it was the same thing. I was 22 when I went to Europe. So, I mean, it's just what you do as a young person. You go and explore and see what's out there, see the world.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing, mate. I'd never heard the call to prayer in the mornings. I'd never, experienced different cultures and so forth. So just to get out there and see different things. And, I remember waking up in the morning, one of the first mornings there, and the call of prayer is going off at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning where I was in. And I'm like, what the hell is that? I'd never heard it, and not being disrespectful. I just had absolutely no idea what it was. And, none of that sort of cultural stuff we were sort of exposed to before we left. Unlike today, you get the whole, several days of cultural submersion and this sort of stuff before you deploy now, which is great, because I'm like, what the hell is that? And they've got, the old sorts who've been in Malaysia multiple tours, turn around and said, oh, it's just a call to prayer, mate. They're Muslims. And I'm like, what the hell's a Muslim? And just because you're sort of a bit isolated as a kid, that sort of stuff. So
yeah, absolutely.
It was cool to see, and get to travel around and go into Penang and go down to Palada, the Jungle Warfare School, and Singapore, and all these other places. I mean, during the Christmas period, I went to the Philippines, for Christmas with a group of mates, and it was absolutely amazing again. So it was unfortunately I got really sick in Malaysia, which is probably one of my downsides. So I got dengue fever when I was there, and unfortunately, nobody really knew what was happening. I was getting, a lot sicker and sicker and sicker, and my blood platelet levels were dropping really low, and the doctors and nurses from the RAF base had absolutely no idea what was going on. They tested me for everything else, and I feel like I was a pincushion, getting blood taken out of me every day. It was, they call it the bone crushing disease, and it's horrendous, mate. It's like, anybody who's had it knows exactly what I'm talking about. It just feels like somebody was smashing you with a sledgehammer. And the RAF doctor, female doctors, turn around to me. She goes, I think you've got dengue fever. We haven't tested you for that, so we will. Bang, and there it was. So you just got to ride it out, mate, And I remember my mates having to pick me up out of my bed because I'd be in the fetal position because I couldn't straighten my legs out, and my bow was twisted, and it was horrible, mate. I lost 12 kilos in 2 weeks. It was
far out. Yeah.
I was really sick, mate. So, so that sort of stuff.
So you had
Um,
some good experiences and some and some not so good experiences in
yeah,
yeah.
I had a lot more good ones than I did bad ones, mate. And it's funny because there's the guys that I joined the army with and served with, and we get together most Christmases, and we just laugh and talk about Butterworth, and we talk about things that happened in the battalion and so forth. Because they're just really good memories that oh, do you remember this and do you remember that? And a lot of I've got really bad memory nowadays, and boys tell me about things. I'm like, I got no idea what you're talking about, mate. I was not involved in that. You know what I mean?
Oh, mate, yes, no, it's all fun and games, absolutely. And so
Yeah.
after Malaysia, you were deployed to the United Kingdom on ex North Star Southern Cross. What was the purpose of this deployment, and what are some of your favourite memories about it?
Okay, so I was in B company at this stage, and our company the year before had won champion company. So one of the things was that we got to do the exchange with the British Army on North Star Southern Cross. So we went to Edinburgh in Scotland with the 1st Battalion, the King's Own Scottish Borderers, and they sent a company to Australia to replace us. So we lived in their barracks, and they were at a barracks called Dreghorn, which was on the southern side of Edinburgh. And we just do an exchange with, working with the Brits, learning how they did things. And what was interesting about working with a Scottish battalion, I didn't know this at the time, but they were known as a lowland battalion, and they weren't allowed to wear kilts, because in Scottish tradition is only Highlanders wear kilts. So they're like the Black Watch and the Argyle Southern Highlanders, they wear kilts. But the King's Own Scottish Borderers, because they were known as a lowland battalion, they wore trews, which are tartan trousers. So, they didn't wear kilts. So I thought that was interesting, just part of their tradition. And trying to understand them was probably one of the most challenging parts, mate. Having some jock trying to give me weapons lessons on the SA-80 and the Law 80, and this, which was a one-shot rocket launcher sort of thing. And it's just like there's a lot of hand motions and a lot of sounds, but a lot of us are going, "The hell's he talking about?" That was probably one of the hardest things I found, was trying to understand them, because they got really thick Scottish accents, but it was, really, really good. We were lucky enough. We did the Edinburgh Castle Guard, and we did that for, I think it was 3 or 4 days from memory, and we were the first Australians to ever do it, and one of the first foreign countries to do it. So that was pretty significant. I remember, because I was a Lance Corporal, so I was a guard 2IC. I'd stand in between the two guardsmen at the gates of Edinburgh Castle, and another guy who was in my platoon, a bloke called Matt Locke, who won the MG in Afghanistan. Him and I were Lance Corporals together in the company, in the platoon, and just standing there, having people walk up to us going, "I thought there was supposed to be Scotsmen on the guardhouse." No. And like people looking at us sort of, "Hey, are you from Australia?" "Yes." Wearing our slouch hats and so forth. And so that was a really good experience, mate. It was representing your country on a international stage, and it was good. A lot of people were like, I thought you were Australian, or where are you from, sort of thing. So yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed my time in Scotland. And the UK in general. We spent a bit of time down at Salisbury Plain and doing the urban war fighting down there at Copeland Down and so forth, and getting to work with other units, and seeing how the Brits do things and so forth. So yeah.
So you come back from exchange, and in 1998 you attended the first Commando selection course. What is the difference, for people who aren't aware, between the SASR and the Commandos, and the role that they have in the Army? And for you, why did you choose Commandos rather than the SASR?
Well, to answer the last question first, I had friends of mine who in the battalion that went to SASR selection. And I think just personally, I was recon qualified and so forth, and sneaking around and watching people really didn't interest me that much. I really, in the battalion doing recon was fun, but, it wasn't really that appealing to me. It was, you're a recon platoon and, the best of the best, so forth in the battalion and whatnot, as some people would say. And just in the big picture of things, it didn't really appeal to me all that much, to be quite honest, and sitting around watching people for weeks on end, it's, I'd rather be walking in there, kicking somebody's door in, doing the job, and then walking out and going home. To me, that was more appealing. So when 4-hour, I was re-rolled in 1997 to Commando Battalion, which is the first full-time commando capability we had since World War II. Not taking away from the first Commando Regiment guys, because a lot of them were our Carter staff when we did selection. It just appealed to me. I looked into it more. They were amphibious, airborne. Most of their stuff was about urban operations, which I really enjoyed. I remember it from the UK and I loved it. I mean, we're talking about very different tactics and things like that, but that sort of stuff really appealed to me. It was like, get in, do the job, get out as fast as we possibly could, and, so in the nutshell, commandos at the time, things are a little bit different now, but commandos at the time were more of a strategic capability, which they still are, doing, major raids on enemy targets, behind the line sabotage work, which the SAS still did as well. But at that time, SAS was more about counter-terrorism and they were more about strategic reconnaissance and so forth, where commandos just went in there really hard and fast, took out the target that they needed to, blow something up, kill what they needed to kill, grab what they needed to grab, and withdraw as fast as they could. And that is basically what the difference was between us. And obviously as things progressed throughout the career, things changed and so forth. And a lot of the roles were similar to each other over the years. And that really appealed to me. And that's why I went to and did Commando and SAS. So, for example, like I mentioned Matt Locke before, Matt went and did SAS selection the year before I went to Commando. He's in, I think, the second half of 97. I did my selection course in the first part of 98. And, we always remained friends and so forth, and we'd see each other on deployments and say good day to each other, passing back and forwards and whatnot over the years. But yeah, it's just some tasks suit some people and some tasks suit others. So, if it's about a name, I think you're doing it the wrong way around, because it's got to suit your personality and how you are as a person. So, SAS have a different type of personality to commandos, and
absolutely,
some things suit some people and some suit the others.
Absolutely. And so, who were some of the other participants on the course with you, and how many started, and how many successfully completed the course, and what for you did you find the hardest while you were doing your selection?
Well, it was we had about 140, I think, from memory start. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was about 140. We had 2 females start the course. We had Brett Wood, who won an MG and a Distinguished Conduct Medal in Afghanistan. He was on the course with us. A bloke called Chris Gotch. He was on it. Chris unfortunately died later on. Weston Hennessy and Dusty Lovett and a few other guys who became quite renowned within the regiment, were on that selection course. And there's, many more people that were involved in it who know that course. I mean, it was not the first selection course, but it was the first selection course that was opened to the whole of Army and whole of Defence, So in 97, obviously the guys within the battalion did their commando selection to start the process and get the battalion re-rolled and so forth. And then, those guys who did the first one in 98 were the first ones that did it open to the rest of Army. So I think, for me personally, the hardest thing that I found on that selection course was doing the 30 clicker. So we had a 30 clicker route march I'm only a little bloke, mate. I'm only 5'9". At the time I was weighing probably about 75 kilos, 80 kilos max. And I'd never marched 30 kilometres straight. I did a route march for 40 kilometres, but that was done over 2 days as a young digger. But, I had less than 4 hours, 30 minutes to complete what was classed as the beret selection phase of doing 30 Ks. And I had, during the selection course, I had slept in hoochies, and my hoochie mate was a bloke called Bren Gun Billy, who we called Bren Gun Billy later on in career. He became our CSM a couple of years later, but we called him Bren Gun Billy. And he was like 6'5", mate. So him and I started the route march together, early hours of the morning. Everything was weighed. We had to have, a certain amount of kilos, blah, 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 blah. And it was pitch black. And the only way I could keep up with him was to run. So, he's taking these massive strides, and I'm like trying to keep up with him. But I think just the whole trying to beat the clock, because back then, the idea that you had to be beret suitable, you had to beat the clock at under 4 hours 30 minutes to be deemed suitable. But you had 5 hours, but 4 hours 30 was sort of like, the unwritten cutoff line, and just trying to run and keep up. And a lot of us little blokes. Brett Wood was another one. We were just running everywhere because we just had to keep up and keep the time and so forth. And I found that extremely challenging. It's just putting my body under that much strain because, this is one of the last things we did as part of our selection course. So we'd already been going for 7-8 days doing things. So this is one of the last tests we did. So we did the 2.4 and the 3.2 kilometre run, the 5K speed march, and all these other tests, and days of not having food and, doing all these other tests and so forth and getting yelled at. And, there's some famous guys in the regiment that, have been RSMs and so forth, who were our instructors, when we stood up to do the courses and that, and it's like, I just remember them yelling at us and saying certain things and, just all these little bits and pieces. But that 30 clicker and trying to beat that 4 hours 30, and still had to have a certain amount of weight left in your pack and your webbing and with your rifle. And, I ended up doing it in 4 hours, 22 minutes, which was, I just couldn't believe I did it that quick. And to me, that was probably the hardest thing to do, because I'd never marched that fast, that fast with that much weight ever. And being from a mechanised infantry battalion, mate, we didn't do things like that. That's not what we did. So, to me, that was probably the most physically hardest thing I did. And then being a kid from Melbourne, I grew up and I loved the water and so forth. So doing the environmental exposure, swimming in the ocean and climbing cliffs and rappelling on stuff. So I loved it. I was recon, so I was airborne rappel qualified, and all that sort of stuff was great. But I think that in particular was the hardest thing I did. Yeah, by far.
How long was the process in obtaining your Commando beret, so your green beret?
All up, it was, probably about, by the time I got my beret, it was about 7-8 months of courses. So we started in February, and, by the time we finished, it was interesting, because by the time we finished our Commando basic training course, there was probably about 40 of us left. So after selection, we're sort of breaking down to maybe, I think there was probably about 60 or 70 of us left. And then by the end of the CBTC, or Commando Basic Training Course, which was about 3 weeks long, we had probably about 40 of us left. And then we're broken into two parts because we were running simultaneous courses, So one guys would go off and do roping, and the other guys would go off and do an amphib course and so forth. So, and then we'd swap over. So by the time we finished, the last course I did was the para course, and that was July, August, I think, 98 from memory. And then, didn't officially get our berets until we marched into the battalion, which was, for me, was in October of that year. So yeah, about 7 months, I think it was. It took us for all the courses, and guys got injured. And I got injured on my amphib course, and so I had to go back and do things again, and so forth. But by the time I got qualified, it was, it's about 7-8 months worth. Nowadays, it's a lot longer. So which is good because there's so much more things the guys do now.
So you were posted to the 7th Platoon Bravo Commando Company 4th Battalion. Where were you based, and what was the company's motto? And then later on, the company was restructured. Why was it changed?
Bravo Company was the first full-time commando company, and it was its original motto was "Hook In," which was, from the Vietnam era days when the battalion deployed to Vietnam, and then when the battalion was amalgamated with the 2nd Battalion, B Company kept the same motto, "Hook In." So when they unlinked in 1995 and created 4th Battalion and 2nd Battalion, 4 B Company kept Hook In, which was a shark. So that was the company's motto. But over the years, things started to change. The role of the battalion changed. The company's changed and so forth. And when I became the CSM of the company in 2010, the company's motto was, Sparta, because our mascot was Spartans. And then, eventually it changed to convicts, which is, that's another part of the story. But when I joined the company, we had 4 platoons. So we had 3 Raider platoon, what was classed as a Raider platoon, which is the strike platoons. And then we had a recon sniper platoon. And slated in the company was the 5th platoon, which was a heavy weapons platoon. So SFMG, anti-armour, mortars and so forth. But what happened was, because the manning was sort of capped at a certain level, the heavy weapons platoon wasn't manned full time. And when we had missions on and tasks, if we needed mortars or we needed heavy weapons, guys who were qualified within the company would brigade together, for a better term, and be under command of company headquarters, and they would become the heavy weapons platoon. So if we needed mortars, they did that. If we needed SFG, we did that. And we brought them out of the platoons to fill that role. And what ended up happening in B Company in the early days was that the platoons were given specific tasks, a little bit like SAS had their troops, had an airborne troop or a free fall troop, they had a water ops troop, and they had a vehicle mounted troop. It was similar now in B Company, where our company commander was an SAS guy at the time, and my platoon, 7 platoon, was like the amphib platoon. So our responsibility was always the amphibious side of missions. And, one of our platoons, 8 platoon, became the assault platoon. And, we sort of chopped and changed things to suit what the mission was at the time. And later on, when we went to Timor in 2001, we re-rolled back into 3 platoons again, like a standard light infantry battalion, but we still kept the commando role. And then when we came back from Timor, things changed again in the regiment, and the regiment sort of stayed, with the 3 platoons, but they had 2 Raider platoons and a recon sniper platoon. And then later on, they created a 4th platoon, which became the heavy weapons platoon. So, things changed over the years to what they became.
So, do the commandos, do they have much involvement with the other personnel, like other platoons in the army, or are they very limited, or are they by themselves, or how do they interact with the non-special forces?
Certainly in my time, I'll talk about my time. Very limited exposure to big army. Once you became part of special forces, you generally not stayed away from them, but you had very little to do with them. You interacted with them on courses, promotion courses and specialist courses and things like that. And, on operations, you had very limited exposure to big army. I mean, when my company was in Afghanistan, we had 2 RL with us. We did a couple of joint operations together, but, we weren't, interacting side by side, so to speak. We had LOs attached to the platoons and companies, but they weren't part of us and we weren't part of them. They're doing their part. We're affecting the battle space to allow them to do their things, and that's generally how it worked. We were sort of doing our thing. one of the biggest exercises I did as a commando was Swift Eagle in 2004, which is, quite a large exercise. And, one of our biggest parts was securing the amphibious landing beachhead at, God, I can't even name the place now, in northern Queensland. And, we did a handoff from SAS guys. We secured the area. We did a handoff to the amphibious lodgement group, and then we left, and that's pretty much how it was, sort of thing. You had very little to do with, big army. You did your thing. You came in, I think that was one of the best recruiting tools we had, because we weren't in the field for weeks on end. We'd come in, do our task and go. And they're like, who the hell is that blokes, sort of thing. So, yeah. So other than, courses, you generally had nothing to do with big army, which was, I think, one of the, the best recruiting tools we had, because guys would see us come and go and like, what are they doing? So especially with counter-terrorism roles, it was like we'd have companies from battalions providing us the outer cordon, and, we'd work, when I was the platoon sergeant on team, we had a company from 3RA providing the outer cordon, on some major exercises and so forth, and they'd see us come in, do our thing and go. And, these poor buggers are there beforehand and setting up stuff, and we're out of there. And I know it was a big recruiting thing. So guys I was in the company with who came later on, like, man, I remember you guys turning up to do exercise and you'd be here and you'd be gone. He says, that's one of the best recruiting tools we had. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's one of those things that, like special forces, the name says it all, Nick. Like special forces, it's in the name itself. Like you guys are doing specific tasking, and both you and the SASR are doing specific tasking that is, you've got your missions, and it's I can see why it is very different to the regular battalions. And I can see the appeal. I can really see the appeal as a young dig would, want to go in and see if he cut the mustard to be in the special forces.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, absolutely, mate. It's like, like I said at the beginning, I remember putting my hand up to go and do selection. So one of the hardest things I ever did in my life was volunteer to join the army. That was the first thing, was actually just doing it, not just saying I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually do it, and I did it. And then the next part, mate, was actually putting my hand up and volunteering to go to commandos, because it was the unknown. You didn't know. I had mates that were in SAS and so forth, so they could tell you about stuff, but commandos was so brand new, and it was, nobody really knew anything about it in particular. We understood the stories from World War II about independent companies and so forth. And mind you, the independent companies are nothing like commandos are today. Like massively different, mate, massively different. Different tasks, different missions. But our heritage comes from that, and it's, the name commando being a Boer word, and it's that whole give it a go, because, that adage that if you don't give it a go, you'll never know. So, and unfortunately some guys don't make it, and they feel really hard about it. It's got nothing to do with that, mate. It's just, unfortunately, it's not what we're looking for. And I was lucky enough to pass, mate. So, we have a saying, it's harder to keep your beret than earn it. And it is, because there's so much more you've got to learn once you become that basic commando qualified guy. You have years and years and years of training, and you've got to perform all the time, because there's somebody else who's going to come and take your position if you don't perform. So,
So I've heard, Nick, that a commando is basically the equivalent of an elite athlete. Is that a fair view of what a commando is?
Yeah. I mean, not just commandos, SAS is very similar as well. When I joined the army, mate, we didn't have physiotherapists, and we didn't have rehabilitation programs and so forth. I mean, they were there, but they weren't there. You know what I mean? Like when I went to infantry battalions, you never went to the regimental aid post because you were seen as weak. And that's just the mentality that we had back then. So when I went to commandos, there was so many things that opened up to you. Nutrition, physiotherapy. When you were injured, you were taken care of. So there's a lot of work that happened between the AIS and our regiment, and guys within our regiment, guys like Paul Cale and so forth, had a huge influence with their AIS combative sports programs. And, so we had this huge interaction between, professional athletes. We had a lot of things going on with football clubs and so forth, and rugby union and league and AFL teams and so forth would come and train with us and do things we were doing, and would go and help them with their stuff. So to be classed like the guys, what they get now is a lot more than what I certainly had in my time in the regiment. And you are like a professional athlete because of what you have to do consistently. You have to do it all the time. You're pushing your body to the limits all the time of what you're doing. Jumping out of an aircraft, mate, is not a natural thing to do. And the amount of stresses that it puts on your body, doing static line jumps and free fall, and not that I was a free faller, but, you talk to the boys who do free fall jumps, 5, 6 of them a day, the amount of stress that get put on their bodies, and the amount of mental stress you're going through doing room combat and, counter-terrorism drills and standing in the back of cars, and your body's just going through so much stuff. So, and guys get injured. And when we get injured really, really badly, unfortunately. And, guys need to take the time to do their recovery and so forth. So, they get the whole treatment system that God, I wish I had it as a young soldier, because the injuries I have today wouldn't be so bad. So, I think, like a professional athlete, absolutely, mate, because of the physical and mental abuse that you do to your body is you need that mentality, to be that type of person. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So you've passed your commando selection now, and in 1999 you were deployed on Op Spitfire, and so this was before Op Warden, and you were attached to the 3 SAS squadron as an observer. Can you tell us about this mission and what was the role that you played in it?
Okay, so myself and 4 other guys from the battalion, from the company in particular, went to Catherine, REF base Tyndall, and this was obviously, as mentioned, the prelude to Op Warden, which was the Interfet action in Timor. So this is July, August 99. So things were building up politically in East Timor, and there was quite a lot of tension going on, and the history and so forth, blah, 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 and the militias doing their thing. So 3 SAS squadron was put on standby. They were sent to Catherine, and the 5 of us were attached to the squadron to observe their planning process and how they were doing things, and we could bring that back to the company and learn from them for us to do our planning process and do holding area routine, what they call a holding area. So when you're in a staging area, you have a holding area, and you plan all your missions and so forth out of that. And so we were attached, and we were just watching, observing things, taking notes, about how things were done and so forth. And then during the planning process for the evacuation of Australians, the SAS guys realised they didn't have the numbers that they needed to be able to do all the mission and tasks that were given. And obviously, they were going to be the only combat troops on the ground at the beginning, and that was to withdraw the Australian civilians and aid workers and military guys out of East Timor before Interfet. So they asked us to provide aircraft security. So they'd go and do their part, and we'd just be on the runway with the C-130s, making sure the aircraft wasn't attacked and so forth. So that's what that was the task we were given, which came out of the blue, and the SAS guys were like, man, we need some help. We don't have enough guys, so we did all the training, shooting and so forth, fast roping and lots of sort of gear. And so that was the task we were given. Unfortunately, at the 11th hour, politics getting involved with things, mate. So, the rug was pulled out from underneath us, and we were quite annoyed about it. Obviously, we'd spent the last couple of weeks training and learning all about the aircraft and talking to the aircraft crews and, what we were going to do if we crashed and, the E&E plans and all sorts of stuff. So we did a lot of planning for it, and but hey, that's how the cookie crumbles, man. So, unfortunately, the rug was pulled out from underneath us. We didn't end up going. We stayed around. The SAS guys went in and did their job and came back, and we had a very famous major in the unit, a bloke called Major Hans Fleer, who was a very famous SAS guy. He came up to check things out and hit us up about because he obviously thought we were going and so forth, and found out what was going on. And when I remember the look on the people's faces at 3 SAS got, and when Hand Fleer turned up, because all the old salts were like, oh shit, the Iceman's here, because that was his nickname. It's like, oh shit, the Iceman's here. It's like, yeah. So it was what it was, mate. It was a bit of a shame that we didn't get to go, but that's not the first time that we've been prepped to go somewhere and not gone. So it is what it is.
Sometimes, mate, that's from the veterans I've spoken to. That's the army. Sometimes, unfortunately, that's how the cookie crumbles. Like you said, that's how the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you learn from it. You see. The best thing I got out of that, mate, was just actually seeing how those guys, the SAS guys, did things. Because I'd never seen it before. So being a commando and learning it as a new one and trying to understand how they did business and how things were set up and all that sort of stuff. It was a good learning experience.
So your next deployment was on Plumb Bob in 2000, which was the evacuation of Australian nationals from the Solomon Islands. What was your main memories of that deployment?
Yeah, so Plumb Bob come up out of the blue. Obviously, there was a lot of political tension in the Solomon Islands in the early 2000s, in 2000 in particular, in 99 and so forth. And there was a lot of unrest. So at the time, HMAS Canimbula, which was the amphibious landing ship, had just come into service. So our company, B Company, was put on the ship, and we were sailing to Shellwater Bay to do an exercise with the ship, doing our on-off drills with our boats and, some live fire stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So we were already transiting up to Shellwater Bay, Townsville area to do this exercise. And then the balloon went up for the Solomons. So, perfect opportunity. We had, the Commando company on board, and we had our battalion SOC-C, which is Special Operations Command and Control Element, which was the operations guys and the CO and so forth, the signals dudes. So we just steamed flat out to Townsville. We offloaded in Townsville, went out to RAF Garbutt, and I think it was 8 Company 1 RAR got on board and sailed out to the Pacific Ocean, and one of the platoon commanders from Alpha Company became my platoon commander in the battalion a few years later. And him and I would discuss. I was a sergeant, section commander at the time. And him and I said, hey, he goes, did you ever do that Operation Plumb Bob? I said, yeah, I did actually. He goes, man, I was one of the platoon commanders who got on the HMS Canimbula, set sail. He goes, that was terrible. He goes, I was seasick for a month. It was just, so we were in RAF Garbutt, planning and doing our mission planning and preparing for the operation and so forth. And these poor buggers from one area, has been seasick, on this, because there's a tropical cyclone coming off the coast and all sorts of things. So I think the biggest thing I remember out of that was that we were the first SF combat element that was part of the planning process. And eventually we had 2 squadron SAS turn up who were actually in Sydney preparing for the Olympic Games, which was happening a little bit later in that year. So this was about, I think it was about July from memory, June, July 2000, this was happening. And obviously the Olympic Games were happening in September, I think it was. So 2 squadron were down in Sydney preparing, and we were up planning our mission, and then those guys turned up to Garbutt after that and got involved in the planning process. And they obviously had a very specific role that they were doing. Our role was going to be to we had multiple roles happening at the time, and whichever happened to be the best option was going to be used. I won't talk about what SAS was doing because I wasn't part of it, but we were planning on different missions like parachute RV at sea with the Canimbula, with our boats and so forth, and then transiting and securing beachheads and so forth. to landing at the airfield and securing the airfield and the route into town to retrieve Australians and so forth. So there was all these different plans that were happening at the time. And so that is what I remember out of it the most. It's just bang, 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 bang. And our CO at the time was a bloke called JJ Singleman, who, sorry, no, it wasn't JJ Singleman. It was, can't think of his name right now. Slipped my mind. Anyway, yes, it was JJ Singleman. And he was just, a really good planner, and very forceful in the way he did things, and obviously understood the commando capability, which was, at the time, was very, a lot of people, especially in Special Operations Command, didn't really have a good grasp, especially Big Army, on what the capability that we could provide. So, we had a lot of good stuff going on. We had, a lot of good capability that, had been operationally tested and so forth. And we'd been given a tick to deploy operationally and so forth, because if we hadn't, we wouldn't have done Spitfire and we wouldn't have been doing this one and so forth. So, he had a really good understanding of what we were about and what we could provide to Big Army and to provide strategically to government, and how us and SAS could work hand in hand, with each other and feed off each other and so forth. So he had a really good understanding, and which was a massive benefit for us. So, Murphy's Law, mate, you plan for the worst, but the simplest thing came out, and, only a small number of guys got to deploy. And, it was a success. So that Plumb Bob was considered the first operational deployment of a commando capability since World War II. So, as a full commando company, not piecemeal guys, 4 or 5 guys like we did on Spitfire and so forth, but the first commando company deployment since World War II. So, for an operation. So, like I said, not all of us got to deploy on that operation, as in leave the country and so forth, but we all deployed to plan and so forth, which was, it's quite a big thing in our battalion at the time.
Absolutely. And like we go forward into 2001, and you were deployed to East Timor, and like for you, I'm just looking, going, this is a busy 3 years for you, like, going from operation to deployment to next deployment, like it's a busy 3 years, like from when you obtained, like joined the Commando Regiment to then, 99, 2000, 2001. That's a big 3 years, mate. Like there's a lot of deployments there.
Yeah. And not just that, mate. We're doing exercise after exercise after exercise, and one of those exercises actually became an operation. We didn't even know, become part of a border protection operation. So, one day this border protection medal turns up in the mail. Like, what the hell's that for? Sort of thing. So it was, so you constant. If you weren't deploying, you were doing exercise, deployment, exercise, and we were really, really busy. You're right. In that first 3 years, mate, we were flat out all the time, and it was good for us because it got our name out there and people knew who we were, and, we were doing some really good stuff. So, yeah, it was good.
So what are your fondest memories of East Timor?
I think personally, giving back to the Timorese, like for those who understand Australian military history, the second and the second, fourth independent companies during World War II, especially the second, the Timorese people helped them so much during the Timor campaign, protecting them, feeding them, carrying their packs, having the fourth. And, there's a good story about it. It's a debt of honour that we owe the Timorese people. And I still believe that today. And so when I went to Timor, there was, in our battalion, when we deployed, there was 2 commando companies that went. So Bravo and Charlie were our commando companies at the time. And we had 2 light infantry companies, which were Alpha and Delta. Plus we had logistics support company and so forth. And we had recon snipers. And my company, B company, were up in a forward operating base called Bobonaro. And Bobonaro was up in the mountains of East Timor on the southern side of our area of operations. And we boarded up against the Kiwi battalion, which was on the southern side towards Suwai. And Bobonaro was at one stage, the company headquarters for the second independent company during World War II at one stage. So there's a good book called The Double Reds of Timor, which is about the second. And there's a photo that was taken from the company headquarters in Bobanaro looking over south towards Suai, and there's a big flat plateaued mountain. So it's just like somebody cut the top off this mountain, and it's in the photo. So we were in Bobanaro. We're the first commandos to be in Timor since World War II. And we were like, where the hell is this photo taken from? So we spent a day looking for this position, and we found it, and we took a photo. And we sent it back to the Second Association. So, nearly 60 years later, we're here. So being the first commandos back to Timor since World War II, that was huge for us, and going into the little villages, a lot of the older guys, the older men were there during the war, World War II, and they knew who commandos were. And once they realised who we were, and, we're Australian commandos, they're like, oh, they'd all come out of the woodwork and come and shake our hands, and, that just giving back to those people because they did so much for us during the war. To me personally, that was such a huge gift to be a part of, other than the fact that we're trying to help the Timorese people establish their nation and so forth, in the political side of things, but just being able to show, the people of Timor that we're back, because of put all the political wrangling aside, we're back and we're here to help, and we've been back ever since. So that was probably the biggest thing that I remember about being in Timor, is just how much the people really enjoyed us being there, and loved having us around, and, the connection between our two countries, and, meeting old guys who were criados, as they were called back in the day, the kids that carried our packs and helped us out and gave us food and, that sort of stuff, talking to these old men through the interpreters and so forth about their experiences. And yeah, it was amazing. And being places that people, Westerners, in fact, had never been to for such a long time, especially since the Portuguese left and so forth. And, I just, I've been back to Timor numerous times since then. And I think just being able to help country, it's interesting because in a lot of aspects, Timor is considered the most successful UN mission ever. And I think a lot of it had to do personally with the way the Australians do business in the counterinsurgency operation side of things, but also just personally the connection that we have with a country like that, and what they did for us and so forth. So yeah, I think, being a part of that and showing them, them we're back here to help, and we're back here to thank you for everything you did for us. So yeah.
Absolutely. And in that same year, Nick, 9/11 happened. Where were you when it happened, and did you think that this was going to be the beginning of a major war?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in Bobanaro on September 11, and I was in my section, or my team were doing the security for the FOB at the time. So I was off picket. I was laying in bed, and one of the guys from my team, we had in the FOB there, we had like a TV entertainment room, and we had the TV that would be playing, CNN and bits and pieces, ABC TV and whatnot, 24/7 sort of thing. And one of the boys in my team who was just come off shift, come running into the where we were staying. Nick, get up. A plane just flew into the World Trade Center. I'm like, hell are you talking about, mate? I'm like sleepy-eyed and what the hell are you talking about? He goes, no, the plane just flew into the World Trade Center in New York. I'm like, so I got up. And by this stage, a lot of people from the company had been woken up, and we watched, standing in the TV room, and watched the second plane hit the World Trade Center, the second tower. And I'm just like, oh, shit. And we're all like looking at each other and I said to myself, somebody is in a world of shit now, and this has just started a war. And it's the longest war we've been involved in ever since. So, yeah, I remember that, people talk about, where were you when JFK was killed, and where were you when Elvis died, and that sort of stuff. Well, I was standing in a TV room in Bobanaro watching the second plane hit the Trade Center, and it's not necessarily realizing the depth of how much it would change things for us, but realizing that, wow, I just watched the beginning of a war, like when the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor sort of thing, it's like, oh, this is going to be on, and I remember the American 7th Fleet was not far or in the Pacific somewhere. And I remember seeing Marine Corps helicopters flying around for days afterwards, picking up people and moving them around. We had, in Timor at the time, I'm pretty sure the US Navy Seabees, which the construction guys were building some stuff in Timor at the time. And, they were getting picked up and moved around and so forth. So, yeah, it changed everything, mate. And obviously, especially for us in Special Operations Command and the unit itself, it changed drastically for us.
I remember it personally too, Nick, because I was 8 at the time, and I remember
Jesus, mate, that shows you how old I am.
I remember getting ready for school, mate, and I didn't know it at the time because I was 8. I knew something major had happened. When I turned it on as a kid, I honestly thought it was a movie. I thought it was, I didn't think it was real, and it changed. That day changed the world. It literally changed the world, and I think you're right. Everyone says, where were you when, JFK was killed, or, for me, it's 9/11, the Bali bombings, the tsunami of 2004, these major events that have happened, and 9/11, everyone knows where they were. Like everyone knows exactly at that point where they were, what they were doing, because it changed the world. It absolutely changed the world. And it was, as you said, it was like, from the Second World War when the Japanese dropped the bomb on Pearl Harbor, it started our longest war. So 9/11 happens, and in 2002, you were selected to be part of TAG East. Can you tell us what that is and what was your role in TAG East?
Okay, so part of the government, after 9/11, part of the government plan was to stand up a second tactical assault group. So TAG stands for Tactical Assault Group, which was the counter-terrorism capability, and at that time was responsibility of SASR. So they rotate a squadron through the counter-terrorism capability every year. So throughout the commando qualified guys in the battalion, when we were in, because this all started in Timor. So after 9/11, things started to change drastically for us. SAS guys were drawn out at Timor rapidly and sent back home. And within the unit itself, there was a group of us that were selected to attend the first advanced close quarter battle course at SASR to help raise the second tactical assault group, which would become known as Tactical Assault Group East, because we're on the east coast of Australia. So SAS had Tactical Assault Group West, and we were known as East, or became known as East. So myself and about 40 other guys in the battalion were selected to attend the first CQB course in Perth, and that was in January, February of 2002. Was sent to Perth, and out of the 40 that completed that attended the course, there was 13 of us that finished it, and some of those guys that finished it were Navy clearance divers, which would eventually become part of the TAG, and they would become what was our divers and water operations platoon. So there was 13 of us that finished the course at the end, our first CQB course out of 40, and some of us were selected to go on to become advanced close quarter battle supervisors. We needed to start creating our supervisor capability. So myself and Dusty Lovett and Rowan Jones and a couple of other guys were all part of that. And we started doing the SAS series of courses to become CT capable. So myself and a few other boys went on the method of entry course, learning explosive entry and so forth. Some of the boys went away and did the CT driving course. And we did all these courses in roping and, the way that the urban operations were being done. It was all run by the SAS guys in Perth. And at the end of it, we came back to Sydney with 2 platoons a land assault platoon, which is what I was in. I was the method of entry operator for one of the teams. My call sign was X-ray 1-3, which the 3 means you're an MOE operator. 1 is that you're in the first team or the senior team, and X-ray was just the platoon number. We had X-ray platoon, so X-ray 1-3. Another good mate of mine, a bloke called Peter Caife, who unfortunately died a few years ago. He was X-ray 2-3, so he was the MOE operator of the platoon, and we became the first TAG East in July 22, 2002. We became operational, and we were the beginnings of what TAG East became. So we had a land assault platoon, we had a water platoon, which was all clearance divers. There's a couple of army guys in it that filled in positions because they didn't have enough divers to do it. I mean, they weren't divers, but they filled certain roles and positions, and they had a SAS diver as their troop sergeant and so forth to give them that combat diving experience and so forth for counter-terrorism. And we had a sniper platoon, so, and obviously a logistics section and a signals troop and a headquarters and so forth, and that became Tactical Assault Group East. So it was a long 7 months, mate. It was some of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. That CQB course was horrendous. It was non-stop, man. It was Monday to Friday, running, wearing gas masks, shooting. I loved it. Absolutely loved the course, but it was really hard work. Yeah, and the SAS guys gave us no quarter, because the little new kids are on the block, mate. So they're just working us, and we got worked, and we earned every part of that, qualification, and they gave us no leeway, nothing. So, and I learned a lot of stuff from those SAS guys at the time, and I appreciate the things they did teach us and what they did for us and so forth. And it created a capability that the regiment is renowned for now. So it's counter-terrorism and anti-terrorism capability is world class. So.
And I suppose, Nick, it needed to happen because it was one of those key moments where, as you said, you had TAG West, but we had nothing on the East Coast. And as you said, it needed to happen, and there was a gap, and you guys filled that gap and performed absolutely, went above and beyond by the sounds of, as the SAS boys absolutely gave it to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and rightly so. I mean, SAS guys, were running 2 tactical assault groups. So they did have one on the East Coast, which was one of the squadrons, and they had one on the West Coast, and they had a squadron in Afghanistan. So they were rotating through these while we were building up. So one squadron went to Afghanistan in late 2001, and they were rotating through Afghanistan as well as looking after 2 tactical assault groups until we stood up in July of 2002. And those blokes, in some cases there's no blood loss between us, between commandos and SAS, and that's just natural rivalry between us. But I'll take my hat off to them, man. They absolutely got pounded, with their operational requirements that they needed, and they're supporting us, standing up to our capability. And we had guys who were posted to us who were all SAS guys to help us create our capability, and they volunteered to go while the squadrons they used to be attached to were rotating through Afghanistan. So some of these guys actually missed out on going at that time. So, I felt for them too, but I appreciate everything they did for us. So, they were hard markers, and you had to stand up and take the challenge. And, that was a tough period of time, mate, I saw a friend of mine about an interview once, and he said to me, he goes, so you guys would be classed as the plank holders of the TAG. And I'm like, plank holder? Because that's an American term, plank holder. And he said, yeah, you guys are the original ones that started. I said, in actual fact, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so, the term plank holder is quite commonly used now. So, yeah, it was very proud moment, mate. Definitely.
Absolutely. And so we jump forward to 2005, where you were deployed to Iraq. And Can you tell us about some of the challenges of this posting, and what were your first impressions when you landed in country?
Well, we were obviously the first Australians. Well, not first, but we went back to Iraq after the invasion when we had the SAS guys and commandos deploy in 2003 as part of the invasion. So we went to be part of the training team. So we were Australian Army Training Team Iraq 4, Rotation 4. And we were the first training team to actually do combat operations outside of the wire with the Iraqis, and the first training team since Vietnam. So the training team in Vietnam to do combat operations as a training team. So our role was to provide training and support to the Iraqi brigade that was in our Samoa, which was in the southern part of the country, which was part of the British divisional responsibility. So the UK area of responsibility and area of operations. And the first things I remember about coming into the country was how hot it was. Like, I'd never experienced heat like that ever in my life. You know, we arrived in May and, you know, it hadn't quite got into summer, but it was already stinging hot. You know, we'd flown in and out of Kuwait. We were a place called Camp Virginia in the middle of the Kuwaiti desert. And it was just, you know, how horrendously hot it was there. And then flying into Iraq, you know, is even hotter. And I think the biggest thing that I remember, other than the heat, you know, was just how flat that country actually is. It's like dead flat. It's like a moon landscape. It is just sand-colored buildings, black asphalt highways, and hot. Like, trying to explain to the family how hot it was. It's like, stick your head in a fan force oven and put it on 200 degrees. I mean, that's how hot. I mean, it's not 200 degrees, but you know what the point. And my point being is it's really hot. You know, so, and at Camp Samoa, or at Camp Schmitty, sorry, in Samoa, we had, first off, we had the light dragoons from the British Army were there. And then we had the B Company 2 para come in and replace the dragoons. And a good mate of mine in the battalion, him and I deployed together to Iraq as part of the training team. His name is Sarah Connor, and those guys in the regiment know who he is. Him and I were in the same team together in Iraq, in the training team. And Sarah used to be in 2 para in the 90s. And so a lot of the guys in the battalion in 2 para, Sarah served with in Northern Ireland and Kosovo and all these other places. So we got along pretty well with the parachute guys. And yeah, we had a lot of good times with those dudes. And it was, you know, it was a really good experience. Yeah, Iraq was a good experience.
So you were promoted to Commando Platoon Sergeant, and what was different about this promotion for you? Like, what had changed and what had happened previously before you became Commando Platoon Sergeant?
So the way it works in the Commando platoons is that, especially on counter-terrorism duty, so I got promoted to Platoon Sergeant when I came back from Iraq in the end of 2005. And then, so I was posted to, so when I went to Iraq, I was in Alpha Company. I was a section commander. And I went to Iraq with Sarah, and I went to Iraq, and Alpha Company actually went to Afghanistan in 2005. So rotation 1 or Special Operations Task Group. So this is obviously between when we withdrew in 2002 and they went back in 2005. So when I came back, Alpha Company had become Delta Company. So those who left and remained behind became the core structure of Delta Company. So I was posted as a platoon sergeant in Delta Company. And not long after I was in Delta Company, so in 2006, the platoon that was attached to the SA squadron went to Afghanistan. So I was pretty much part of a skeleton crew in the company at the time. So, you know, I was getting ready to rotate back on a counter-terrorism duty. I'd already done 2.5 years straight when we raised the tag. I left there in, you know, June 2004. July 2004. So they needed a new operations sergeant on CT duty. So I rotated back on the team, became the ops sergeant. And then at the end of that year, I became the platoon sergeant of the Land Assault Platoon. So in late 2006, I became the platoon sergeant. And, I was the first commando platoon sergeant to be the tactical assault group, because before that we had SAS guys as our platoon sergeant. So, not just that, I was the first commando senior planner, the X-ray 11. I was the first commando guy to do it. And then, having the honour to be the first commando platoon sergeant to be the platoon sergeant of the tactical assault group assault platoon, and it was Land Assault Platoon. It was huge, mate. It was a big thing. And it was, we were all commandos in that platoon. So the platoon commander was a commando, platoon sergeant, all the team commanders. And the other thing about being a platoon sergeant of a commando counter-terrorism platoon was you had 4 sergeants who were team commanders underneath you. So it's all these alpha males, doing their thing, and you've got to manage these blokes, and some guys are a lot more alpha male than others, and trying to push their weight around and so forth. But yeah, it was a massive honour, mate, to be able to be the first commando platoon sergeant of our own counter-terrorism capability, and yeah, it was an awesome time, mate. Some of the best things I've ever done was on the team. It was an amazing time. Yeah, really good. Very proud to be part of it.
Absolutely, and you should be proud of that, mate. To be the first to be selected for that position, mate. Well done. That's a huge honour, and one that you should be very proud of, and I can see it that you are very proud of that honour.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a lot of things that we did, and capabilities we stood up and so forth, and to and there's a lot of guys who did other firsts, and I was lucky to have some awesome guys in my platoon when I was a platoon sergeant. Brett Wood was one of my team commanders, and he was one of the best commanders we ever had in the regiment. And the other guys that were in my platoon as team commanders and soldiers, and the thing about it back then too, mate, we were rotating through Afghanistan all the time and in counter-terrorism duty, because we weren't rotating companies through at the time. Through CT duty, the trickle system, so to speak. So there's only a trickle of guys would come in at the time. So you always kept a nucleus going within the capability. So guys that, rotating off, coming back from Afghanistan and then rotating on a team, and, counter-terrorism duty, was nothing to be snorted at, because you were flat out all the time, and it is the closest thing to real combat without actually being shot at, so to speak. So you're under the pump all the time. You've got so many things to do and so many capabilities you got to withhold, and guys standing up, like Brett Wood was became our emergency action commander, and he was absolutely brilliant at it. He became very famous in the regiment for that capability and being that commander at the time. And yeah, it was a really, really proud moment of my career, being part of these group of guys, And, like I said at the beginning, Brett Wood and I did our selection course together. So, we'd known each other and been in the company together for years and years and years, and worked back and forwards. And yeah, so we've got a lot of time for the bloke, unfortunately.
That was the first part of our 2-part interview with Special Forces 2nd Commando Regiment Warrant Officer Nick Hill. Join us in a fortnight's time for the second part of Nick's story and his life after his 24 years in the Australian Defence Force. 17 of those were spent in the Special Forces. Thanks for listening.